So we are trying to develop complete solutions. The idea is to develop projects that have not been implemented. We are trying to create some guidelines. How can we develop these energy solutions? The idea is also to involve the knowledge of the families in order to have success. But the idea that is that we are trying also to develop some technologies. I think we play a key role in the development of the innovation because energy production has an impact on everyone. What does mean the energy mean? What does energy mean nowadays? We are also working with some schools. We are trying to raise awareness about energy production means. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for organizing this event. I think we as a foundation, we are having two projects, renewable energies. We have two categories, rural development projects. So we have an educational project that has the objective of empowering the youth to have an active role in the energy transformation, and we are trying to develop specific tools. Because we think that also the professors do not have all the different tools available in order to talk about fair energy, renewable energies. The idea is to improve the education with the more full techniques, with different tools so that the students can learn more. Outside, you could see there is a stand with an exhibition with all our products. So the idea is to have some kits that that the children could play with. They could assemble, disassemble, and then trying to understand more about fair energies. There are some contents about climate change. We are trying to include experiments. That is the project that we are working on. We are also promoting encounter of youth so that they can develop projects. We can develop other type of kits or tools. The idea is to ensure we can take renewable energies to rural areas. That's our other project. We would like to to implement this type of energies in the rural areas, specifically for the agricultural work, because they also have some other problems in the rural area. For example, problems with water, with food, with income. They can also have to face the problems of farming and certifications. So the idea is to try to also address these problems. Thank you very much for the invitation. This system generates too much. Because the idea will be to use solar energy. Need to calculate how much energy will produce each solar plant. And we try to see how can we can connect this to the national system. The idea is to have low price energy, renewable energy, especially sun energy. I'm so sorry for the persons who are listening. We cannot work like this. I think we're trying to learn about wind energy. Another message is that the women we are not using artificial intelligence for the selection of people. We make global level interviews, at least 200. About the educational project, we are working with educational communities in 3 provinces in Argentina. The idea is to train people from the Ministry of Education so that they can, at the same time, they train the professors and teachers. We have playing with this methodology and the results uh, are positive. So we are um, training these trainers, and then we also support them when they are training the students. In- About communities, we work a lot with educational communities. For example, we are installing generators in both projects. The idea is to take energy to remote areas. It is about solar energy. So we have different projects also to use the wind power. The idea is to work with educational communities and especially with the producers. So with the students, we are developing all the parts that are needed to create this energy infrastructure. We are also working on the wind power. We are involved with the INTAC, that is the institution with agro farming technology. They know about farming and livestock. And they have discovered that in the Patagonia of Argentina, they can produce strawberries. So they provide all the farmers with the technological knowledge for the efficient production. For example, they need dropping irrigations, they need water pumps that are very efficient because they are using renewable energy. So we are trying to actively involve in the local community in all the stages of the project. We are developing projects, we are designing energy solutions in conjunction with the community. It is that we do not impose on them the models. It's not something that we have created in the computer. We are developing solutions adapted to the local needs. And that is working. We are following the same pattern, working with the communities. We know that for us, this methodology of developing projects is not new because we are replicating this methodology of work.
A gente invisibiliza as vozes.
Voices visible because the implementation of clean energy does not imply that this is going to be educative, or sorry, they're not going to be equal. We could be also affecting the equality in the area. For example, in the north of Chile, there is industry, an industry that will produce good. So it's a project for the wool development. They have their animals, but the idea was to combine the new energies with their work. And most of the people who participated in the project planning were men. They were the owners of the camels. Since they were the owners of the camels, were the ones who made the decisions on the industry. So we our proposal was to generate a more color. So the learning was that when implemented this project, we were not able to first make a diagnosis that help us to identify who are the most visible people and who are the most invisible people in the area. And how can we work this? So we needed to make an assessment to see how can we implement a collaborative project in a place where it's not common for them, where they are used of men just making the decisions. So the idea is that we cannot question how they are organized, the communities. So, for example, there were a group of women who were organized. The idea was to implement a project that is aimed at empowering these women, but we have to be very careful because we have to respect the dynamics that are already existing in the area. So for us, the learning was that we cannot forget that clean energy is going to ensure um, equality. We have to be very sensitive to the context and to respect the local dynamics. We're talking about technological innovation. We're talking about innovation. Innovation is transforming an idea in order to generate positive impact. With this definition, I want to make my last question. How do your initiative or work is linked with justice, climate justice? About
educativo de ser joven, la verdad es que vinculamos desde la creación de contenido. Un poco en el stand nos van a ver, hemos desarrollado 5 guías prácticas en donde buscamos abordar todos estos temas desde
where we are dealing with these topics, wind energy, fair energies, and for each one, we have developed a pedagogical guide that deals with these topics in a very positive way. This is how we link with climate climate justice. about with the wind strawberries project. We started this project uh, where we were aiming at to work with some rural producers in the Patagonia area. But this Patagonia area is a desert, and we were thinking that each one small producer could be able to take the products to the consumption area. And we then realized this idea had too much challenges because they couldn't it was not positive for them to try to preserve these fruits to ensure they have a good number of fruit in order to take that to other locations. And they were saying in this town nobody used to eat strawberries. We are producing something new, and now we need to think in we are thinking about going to sell this far away. But if you have a town of 10,000 inhabitants and you have 20 strawberry producers, well, it's difficult. So one of the lessons is to diversify this and to ensure that they do not produce all the same. So the justice was as the starting point was positive, but this is not guarantee because they need to make a good, efficient use of water or irrigation systems, accumulation of water. So it's important to think on the adaptation. We want to diversify and to ensure that in those places where to create some other healthy products because people are used to eat only, for example, meat. The idea is to diversify the production. I think we also think we need to ensure working on food justice. How, how the market works in our houses. We have central markets. They have a cost, starting cost. In order to have a good production, they need to use the maximum level of solar energy.
Una manera segura para evitar apagones y otro tipo de cosas. Entonces, se requiere este una buena operación y una buena planificación del sistema para que como ciudadanos podamos acceder a tener una energía menos contaminante y más económica. Yo creo que ya respondí un poco la pregunta con la pregunta anterior, sí, pero solo aprovechando, dado que no era
I would like to highlight the importance of the word fair because ideas we need to prioritize and to address the gaps. So I think it's important to to make the gaps visible, the existing and the potential gaps. And we need to remember that clean energy does not necessarily mean equality. For example, there is a project about the access to energy. It is also a project with a gender perspective. I think sometimes we think in women as consumers of energy with their territorial role of energy because the women are the ones who manage homes, so they need to manage the consumption, they need to manage the food that the family eats, the water. And I think that it's super important to take advantage of this transition to empower women as agents of this transition. Of course, appreciating their knowledge. For example, have to take into account that ancestral knowledge. My grandmother told me, my mother taught me that. So it's very valuable that we need to learn from these dynamics. So the idea is that we are not saying that men do not have a role there. They are also important, but if there is a project for the access to energy where you have the possibility or having more hours of energy for some communities. And we have detected that those additional electricity, those hours of additional electricity have been taken advantage by men because they have been enjoying more recreational hours, but women are using this additional time of energy to work, to do their tasks and chores. So, how can we improve this? So the idea is that we need to be aware of these gaps. So the importance of in including their perspective about socioeconomical gaps and etc. In terms of justice, I would like to make public invitation. If you have the idea of starting a business or as an entrepreneur, I would like you to invite you to explore about this energy transition. And why we are talking about justice? But who is creating and managing the energies? It is not us. It is not something that where the Chilean has invested. So if you are generating an entrepreneur and you want to generate a technology, and you, for example, you want to create an NGO, you will be able to participate in a system where you will be contributing. Because the idea would be to ensure that the capacity is left in the country to develop more energy, more projects. I cannot understand this guy. What are the challenges that you are facing to continue with the innovation? And this is the most difficult question. The idea is how to install and how to sustain projects in time. I think this to forces us to be more reflective and to be more creative in terms of the solution. Our educational project, the idea is to improve the access and the scope of these projects. I think we need to ensure that this project is implemented in different regions of the country. This implies many challenges because right now we are working with 50 schools and we would like to with many, many more schools. And this is something that concerns us. The same happens with the wine strawberries project where the idea is to reach 24 farmers from the province so that each one has a productive unit that is linked to wind energy and some other systems. And we are also developing some workshops. So there is a lot of potential, of course. Not not everybody can be part of the project. We have an eligibility criteria because we want to ensure that the people who join are highly motivated and committed people that are committed with these ideas. So we're talking about 24, but could be many more. And they are producing strawberries, but they could produce many other things. So we are starting with these clean energies. And of course, in the reality is different when you are planning a project, but for us, the challenges are an opportunity to continue improving. As an entrepreneur, the idea is to
Tengo que tratar de abrir un proveedor que realice los diagnósticos para todas las plantas de México, la empresa francesa, desde París y así sucesivamente. Entonces teníamos que conseguir nosotros compararnos con tu proveedor actual, hacer un piloto y cuando
need to compare with the current providers who come from Europe. So we are improving in the number of wind power structures that have been implemented. I think that all the projects need income. At the university, some students come and say, "Oh, I have this project that is a social project, and I am talking about. Do you think this project will be generating income?" They say this is going to be a social project, and I say, you have to include something about profits because if you are an NGO or a group of people, you need to consider this. So the idea
y encontrar alguien me importa somos muy pocos vendedores, ¿ya? Pero, voluntario, ya desafío. Bueno, yo creo que para nosotros y nosotras en el centro de energía y en general, desde mi experiencia, creo que es un gran desafío el trabajar.
challenge has been to understand that energy transition is a big problem. So we cannot solve this from only one perspective. So I think that one of the most important challenges is to ensure that we all recognize that this is an interdisciplinary problem. We have developed this practical guide to define how can you include this as part of on a collaborative effort because we all need to address all the challenges. Since another challenge is a diversity of disciplines that need to be involved. Also, this is a challenge that is not only a technical challenge, it's a social and cultural challenge. And I think that is an intergenerational challenge. I think that we need to encourage the youth to get involved. We need that the youth is willing to participate and that we need to study the careers that our countries need to develop these new technologies that we ensure that we are part of this desire to contribute. I think we need to be more responsible in the different decisions, labor decisions, but also at home, that all of us become more responsible in our decisions and to listen our elderly people because they have already faced challenges. They are the ones who have the experience so that we can to ensure that we listen to them because they can teach us many things, how to solve these challenges. I think technology is advancing. Sorry, I cannot understand.
Ahí sí. Ya, gracias. Bueno, muchas gracias por el panel, estuvo sumamente interesante. Creo que es muy necesario que en este tipo de encuentros se hable de las transiciones justas, que creo que era algo que sentía que me faltó en las charlas que se hizo en el inicio, entre otras cosas. Y bueno, me presento, mi nombre es Ámbar García, soy estudiante de la Universidad de Chile, en la Facultad de Ciencias Agronómicas, y también soy representante de la delegación chilena de la Red Internacional de Mujeres por el Clima, Latinas por el Clima.
National Network of Women for the Climate, and I am participating in an innovation project that talks about agrivoltaic, that is the installation of solar panels in the highlands in order to produce energy under the soil. And talking about the freedom and and food sovereignty, protection of the food sovereignty of the country. And then you start learning more about cultural aspects. And then you need to understand that innovation can also be uh, linked to the rural areas. Of course, I understand there are some difficulties about that in terms of policies, because something that happens in Chile is that SAC does not accept the idea of installing agricultural lands that are combined with the idea of combine that production soil and industrial soils. So I think that I would like to ask, what are the challenges that you see in the works that you are developing so that the energy transition in the region is fair? So what other gaps do you have you discovered, or how do you think that innovation could be truly sustainable and fair?
Le encontramos unos proyectos agrivoltaicos, así que sé muy bien de lo que habla porque no.
I think that the most important challenge, I think we as the academia need to develop the inputs to create this. I think these solar energy projects need to be more promoted, because the people should know that in this way they will have better production. So the challenge in this tiny is to develop an information, to develop this type of information that can raise awareness about this. For example, we could say, okay, we're working with vegetables projects. Everything is working well. I think what this could be the challenge, and how can we support the state to develop this type of projects, because the idea is that we make the good use of the soil, because the challenge is how can we implement more solar energy projects or photovoltaic projects for the production system. And we need to think in the future. If we if we start using solar panels on agricultural farms, and we will creating energy, we were talking about social justice. So we need to develop this type of content. And the demonstrative projects will help us, because this will help us to ensure that the results are more visible. So this is really important. Okay, we don't have enough time. Let's ask one more question. One more question. Good morning. My name is Daniela. I am from Costa Rica. I graduated from environmental health, the University of Costa Rica. So I would like to ask, how can we integrate the interdisciplinary work in energy transition projects that are sort of technical projects, but we need to include also social sciences and environmental science in this type of projects. One more question here. My name is Natalia Gomez from the Latin American Center Transforma. I would like to say, how can we question the youth so that they can feel that this is for us, that we all need to weather on climate action and, of course, in the fair energy transition. Can we answer that question? How can we involve the youth? We think that climate change, the climate change is not leading us to taking actions. I think we need to develop some tools that help about solutions so we can involve all of them. And we cannot just give in the idea that we can not do anything about that. About the first question, I think the people working in the social science are the ones who are not who, the ones who do not get involved because they think it's not part of their scope. And they think that, oh, technology is not for us, it's not for them. That's a wrong idea. We need to involve everyone. I mean, social people, designers, translators, everyone needs to be involved in developing this type of messages. I think that what we need is to develop common objectives, respect the discipline of others, and then the message is that we have to work with the interdisciplinary approach. In our foundation, we have sociologists, politologists, because I am an engineer. So we all need to work together. So we need to get involved with all other science and other experts because we as technicals, we do not know everything. Okay, thank you for your participation. Thank you for getting involved in these topics that are really important for the innovation. On October 1st, we will be launching a project about energy transition. You can contact me outside and I will give you more details. Thank you, Paz, Dalia, Esteban, Constance, Williams. Thank you very much. We invite you, if you are interested in the fair energy transition, you can go
to the Aula Magna, you can go there because we will continue working over there and we will start with panel number 4.
Cierren el micrófono en la pausa, está saliendo todo de que no vale el micrófono, de que vamos a usar esto y lo otro, y todo eso se transmite al YouTube.
Solamente en espacios de decisión y cooperación internacional.
What is the situation or challenge that has motivated the organizational action of your the action of your organization? What strategy are you implementing? You will have 5 minutes. We will start with Joyce, then Mikaelle, Laura, and then we will end with Valentina. I pass the floor to Joyce. Good morning to all of you. I'm so happy to be here. I am in another mission in the country, but I'm so excited about this process. So when you started this space, this is part of our organization, the Latin American Observatory of Geopolitics and Energy. And when we talk about regional integration in Latin America, we imagine like international agreements, infrastructure, economy, but there is something that we clarify. Youth engagement is key for those integrational process. Simple things like sharing spaces. For example, we speak the same language, Spanish, Portuguese, and trying to understand the culture of all the others. So with this auditor, with Latin American people, we start from there. I'm going to tell you about the story of trying to answer these questions. Basically, this is the story about the observatory was born in Foz do Iguaçu, that is a triple border region between Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina. Maybe you've heard about Iguaçu waterfalls. It is called the land of water because there is a large amount of water from the rivers. So Iguazu that connects Brazil with Argentina and Paraná and Paraguay with Brazil. So we've seen a lot of energy projects, and the debate have led us to the creation of a very important space that is the Universidad Federal de Integración de UNILA in the Foz de Iguaçu in the Brazilian part. Now, let's imagine 10 years ago. Please don't calculate my age. So 10 years ago, I was part of a member of a group from Latin America and the Caribbean. We were learning about fundamentals of Latin America, and we were talking about the energy transition in the different countries. And we realized that our colleagues from Argentina didn't know about the energy matrix from Mexico and vice versa. So we are Latin Americans, but we are disconnected. And then this idea started to be shared, the idea of how can we all understand the energy transition of the neighboring countries if we are talking about integration. So that's where this idea was born, because the professor Lucas Kerr mentioned these perspectives. And then there was a group of young people who started to study geopolitical of energy, because this is on only the historical and the location and the energy resources and energy potential. So people from different countries and professors gathered together, and we said, "Come on, why cannot we create a platform to exchange information, news, and opportunities within our countries and also abroad?" Because we were also migrants in Brazil. And also, this was a space where we could, as youngsters, share our researches, our perspective. Sometimes you think that the young people need a master degree or a PhD in order to start working on research, and we wanted to demonstrate that this was not true. So, with this idea of communication, transfer of information, and research, we started our activities 10 years ago. At the beginning, we tried to understand how can we work together, what were the challenges. And then we realized that we had key topics like structure, economy, agreements, but two other topics, that is South-South cooperation and just energy transition. We are trying to answer the challenge about the lack of information, but also the lack of opportunities for the young people who want to do research, but also they want to do practice. I think the universities provide a lot of theory. That is, how can we improve these areas, how can we improve? We have more practical activities, not only theory. So one of the main factors that one of the factors that help us to capitalize this action is trying to connect the youth with the territory, with research, but also generate an impact in their countries. Today, at the observatory, you will see there the observatory. You will have colleagues there, Manuel, Astrid, but also we have been working on creating impact in the communities. When we implemented a joint project with the community Quechua in the Amazon, they contacted us during the pandemic to install electricity with 40 families, and we took youth engineers to do all the project, and we are directly influencing the life of these people in the Amazon region. So yes, a group of students can do something, can create impact, because the idea is to ensure that our research and policies needs to be translated into impact in the field with the people. And I think that is what is happening. We are trying to change this by involving all the people, all the young people from the region. Thank you, Joyce, for telling us about your work as part of OLADE. I pass the floor to Mikaelle. Ah, going. My name is Mikaela, and I am from Brazil. We have an equality within Brazil, the very vulnerable area, and we have climate impacts. But within Brazil, we are also mentioning about renewable energy, green hydrogen, wind power. I am a student of renewable energy, and in my region, we are working in the generation of renewable energy. And we now have the problem in Brazil because there are a lot of impact in the northwest area. Within Brazil, we have renewable energy, but the policies that not allow us to reach to the traditional communities. Within the northwest of Brazil, we have big centers for the generation of wind energy and solar energy that are working there. I am working with the presidency of the Ecotrain. We have many young people as part of the presidency, and each youth young people is working on different topics. I not for energy, but about territorial mobilization and within Brazil for the Cap Ferry. And we are also working on the energy transition. That is how we are going to link youth people with all this project, because the COP30 will be celebrated here in Latin America and in the Amazon region. So we need to integrate these different topics to understand what are the demands from the youth. And I also work with other energy topics, but I think that we can talk more about the work that we are doing in Brazil when we talk specifically with the presidency of the COP. That is very important. The COP will be held in the Amazon region in Latin America. So we would like to see how can we transmit these demands and to be part of the negotiations about the energy systems. Thank
I pass the floor to Laura. Well, my name is Laura. I am from Colombia, and I work for the Climate Action Network for Latin America. Our Climate Action Network is one of the biggest global networks working on climate change. We have about 200 organizations, and in Latin America and the Caribbean, we have 78 organizations, and we are trying to see the conversation of climate change with multilaterals. We have good work with the United Nations Convention on Climate Change and in other spaces. And the idea is how can we integrate civil society demands in the decision-making spaces like COP30, and particularly this year for us, fair transition is really important. I don't know if you are following the negotiations from the convention, but on 2023, during the COP in Dubai, they approved the fair transition program where it was approved. And then we have been developing plan work. There have been some dialogues. The countries are talking about what the just transition means. And from us, from our organization, it's important to talk about energy, but transition is not only about energy, it's a holistic transition. And it also needs to do with agro-food systems, socioeconomical transformation, socio-ecological and political transformations that are aligned to our work. And also we need to understand geopolitical tensions. And from our organization, we are also working on the dynamics that could accelerate or limit the transition, but with an approach of climate justice. In the case of Chile and in the south of Latin America, it's really important to talk about this because of the mineral extraction, because we know that the extraction of minerals is a limiting but also an accelerator of transition when we talk about by renewable energy, by storage production and others. So we have been working very closely about the extraction of minerals, what it implies in terms of human rights, because when we talk about energy transition, we cannot forget the human rights component, not only because of the energy sovereignty or energy poverty, but because of other components of human rights. And this year we are also working with trade agreements that could deepen inequalities, historical inequalities, and vulnerate the human rights that could be European Union Mexico agreements or European Union Mercosur agreements that are aimed at increasing the extraction of minerals in the region. And this could, and we could create this context. When we talk about trade agreements, there's also a problem with companies, and unfortunately, Latin America and the Caribbean had to pay from their money thousands of millions of dollars because of this type of disputes. And the disputes that are demanding the countries in Latin America are countries of mining, gas, and oil. So it's really important to remember that the foreign trades that are supposed to promote sustainability, in reality, they include trade mechanisms that are affecting the reduction of greenhouse gases, and they are also vulnerating human rights. And this is important for our region, and of course, also important for the COP30 or another multilateral spaces. So our main work area is the climate justice. Thank you, Laura, for sharing your work. I pass the floor to Valentina that has her own microphone. Thank you. Thank you, all the participants. Thank you, the panelists. This, the OLADE and Youth for Energy and South Chile, and OLAGE, and the NGO 1.5, all of us were coordinating virtually this event. So it has been a great effort, and this is just an example of what OLADE is doing in order to ensure that youth are part of the conversation in very specific ways. Everything that we have been discussing about your opinions will be taken to public advocacy spaces designed by OLADE. So for us, having you here is really important. This is like our dream becoming a reality. And I know that many of you don't know what is the Latin America Organization of Energy. We are an international public intergovernmental organization. This means that our decision makers are the states. We have 27 member states, and the ministries of energy are our senior level authorities. The ministries gather together every year, and they just discuss about the future. What are we doing? What are the priorities? That is why the space that we are trying to create for the youth is really important, because we have a direct conversation with the ministries, with the policymakers. And since last year, we had this idea of having this type of encounter that is related. That the idea was to create a space for the youth, working with all the people that I mentioned, trying to develop these virtual meetings, trying to identify the key youth people and the ones that are here. So it's a pleasure for me to be here to see each one of you, because you are trying to ensure that the OLADE's work is getting closer to the young people. I don't know how much I time, but this idea was born when I had to attend the Week of Energy in Uruguay, and I was still a student, and a lot of men and very few young people. When I came back to Chile, and I really mentioned this here, I don't know if it is connected, but I talked to the director of the International Studies Institute. She accepted the idea. She talked to OLADE, and now it's implemented. So there are adults that are aware of the importance of involving the youth in these spaces. And now that we are here in the youth, in this space, we are opening the door to other youth. The idea is not only to have a few only choices there. I know that there are all other people connected. The idea is to ensure that we give voice to other people, all the diversity of youth, so that we can work in developing capacities, in working with the states, to ensure that we have more people in the decision-making spaces in the different topics that relate to our interests. This Friday, we will have a dialogue of ministries. But also, I want to invite all the people who are interested in working with us in moving forward with the representation of youth people in these spaces, mainly in energy, because we know that energy is a cross-cutting topic. It's a right, and it's an enabling of other rights. So we cannot talk about energy without mentioning education or health and energy, climate action without talking about energy. So it involves different stakeholders, and I'm so glad to see or to hear that energy is not an isolated topic that is only for experts, but we are also dealing with experts in social science, philosophy, human science, and that we all are part of the same conversation. Thank you for your intervention. In order to continue with this conversation, can you please mention the common challenges that you have in your organizations? What situations, what problems do you face when you try to coordinate with governments, civil society organizations, or with communities or with private sector companies in terms in energy topics? So the idea is, do you face challenges when developing alliances with these sectors, and what are the lessons that you have learned from these experiences that could um, help other civil society organizations? Joyce, you have 3 minutes. I think that Laura already mentioned a key aspect. We were talking about funding. Well, so the idea is, what are the common challenges that we face? Well, I think there are we have different challenges, but the main one is that when we talk about climate energy projects, linking youth people and linking processes, not only in 1 or 2 years, but in the long term, we have a problem of the access to a permanent funding, but also the lack of access to mm, the access to seed capital. I don't know if you have some data, but there is a research that was made by the Juvenile Climate Justice, and they mentioned that from all the funding for the climate and significant climate funding, only 0.96% reaches the youth. So this is really sad. If we are talking about in the panel that how can we make this a fair transition, and we mentioned that intergenerational justice, how can we ensure that we develop critical abilities between generations, and also from decision makers with the uh, trying to understand the innovation and to include these youth people as part of their, not only as part of the delegations, but as truly involving them. We really know that funding is a problem when you have some basic projects, for example, for rural electrification projects. You have two questions. Or maybe you have a giant project with millions of dollars, or you have a very small seed capital. So if we talk about international adjustments, we need to ensure that we can make all the changes in order to ensure that the young people and the communities who are more vulnerable have access to this type of funding, because we have good ideas, good skills, but capital is important to ensure that the projects become a reality. And what are the lessons learned? Is trying to work in these alliances in an effective way. Since we don't have a continuous funding, we look for partners that help us with scholarships so that we can support the young people and ensure they continue engaged, because not because you are young, you need to be a volunteer. So we are doing this in the observatory. Happily, our partners and the university help us with scholarships, so we can pay the youth people. but at the same time is to develop a common vision. And it is difficult when we talk at Latin American level, when we see the future, that vision for the future sometimes is too difficult to be built jointly because of our histories, geographic or language barriers. But something that has been very important is to study the story and to understand why we are here. That is the heart of the geopolitics. Now I pass the floor to Mika. She can talk about her context. Well, in Brazil, we are a country with more than 200 million of people. So when we mention the challenges in the energy system or wind power, we found some specific topics but are related to what is happening in Latin America. For example, here in Brazil, there are more than 1 million of people that do not have access to energy. So we are talking about access to energy where 1 million of people do not have access to traditional energy. And that is a big problem because for this transition, if we want a fast transition for people who do not even have access to the traditional model, how can we do this? So one of the biggest challenges is the lack of visibilization in terms of technology. Here in Brazil, we have a big social technology projects that are led by communities in order to have to in order to have access to energy for the people who do not have energy. And the government of Brazil is not really giving us considering this as a priority. And within this challenge, I already mentioned that 1 million of people do not have access. There was a project where I worked in 2023, and we were in the transition between Bolsonaro to the Lula government. And within that transition, we created some work groups, and I participated in a energy transition work group where the organization that I was working with found a space in this government. The idea was to develop solar energy policies so that we can work on this generation in Brazil. So we started a project. The project that tries to improve the living conditions of more vulnerable people. So we were building houses for people who needed solar energy. This was a policy that implemented these houses so that they can have solar energy in their homes. Also, we implemented some community solar energy where community leaders went through a training process in order to manage all the facilities. If I remember, the question is the share challenges between organizations and how can you adapt your strategies? How can you build strategic effective alliances. We are a network, so we work based on alliances. We have organizations in 18 countries in the region, 75 organizations, and we have the different groups like Latin America, but we have other global level groups. Here in Latin America, we are working with a group from Europe and Canada, and the reasons are related to the fair transition and how the trade agreements impact on Latin America. Common challenges is the funding, as Joyce mentioned. Funding for the climate is a big challenge. Last last year we had a negotiation of the new agreement as part of the convention. So the previous goal was not complied, and there are no transparency. There is no transparency, so we don't know how how the budget was executed. So the idea was to define a new goal because there are funding gaps. And when we talk about energy projects, our first idea is mitigation. We go directly to the emissions of greenhouse gases. But when we talk about energy, we also need to talk about adaptation because this help us for this is a tool for us for adaptation, or this needs to be adapted to climate change. The panelists mentioned, for example, the hydroelectric sector needs to be adapted to the climate change in order to reduce the losses and also the droughts. They have to adapt to the droughts because we have faced important droughts. So the efficiency of hydroelectric plants has been reduced because they don't have the minimal water level to operate. So is there, when we need to talk about funding, there is a very important funding gap for mitigation. And there are not many companies that are willing to invest on mitigation or in damages and losses. There are many electric projects that are facing losses and damages, and there is not funding to recover these projects. So there is a big problem that the companies are willing to invest on mitigation projects when there are projects that are going to give them profits, but there are not companies or that are willing to invest in losses and adaptation. And when we talk about climate change, we are open the doors to do very serious topics. The first one is that the people responsible for the crisis are not being responsible in providing funding. And when they are in the negotiations, they say, no, it is a private sector who needs to bring the sources. Yeah, but that's an additional. You are the ultimate responsible for the problems. And when we talk with the private sector, even though they are responsible, we are forgetting the historical responsibilities. That is the key aspect for climate change. And the second problem of involving the private sector is that the private sector is not going to make an investment without a return of investment that allow them to invest and that is profitable. So when we talk about funding, it's a very complicated word. And in addition to the gaps that we mentioned, there is also a big gap in terms of investment in adaptation for energy projects, and even a bigger gap when we talk about damages and losses. Whole communities have been destroyed by quotation natural disasters, quotations, because they are not natural disasters, that are losing their energy infrastructure, and there's not the funding for them to continue investing. And for us, the important aspect are the alliances or partnerships. So the regional unification does not exist. but we are talking to each other. But the conversation that we are having in Latin America about energy projects, we have to think that there are some big, too much expensive projects that have impact in the communities. And we have the examples on Argentina, Chile, and Colombia. The communities, just to give you an example, the communities in Guajira, there are big wine and sun energy projects because these are the places with a lot of potential for that, but the communities do not have access to energy. They do not have access to resources, to water, and their rights were not respected when because they wanted to build their projects in their area. So when we talk about energy, we need to ask the transition is for whom? Because we cannot think about renewable energies if they are not respecting human rights. So this is important conversation. So the transition is a solution, but that transition cannot be made without considering fundamental human rights and without taking into account the free prior consent from communities. And we as civil societies need to defend this before the private sector who are pressuring for the transition because they know there are resources for energy transition and they are calling it fair because that is not fair because the most affected communities are the most affected and they have less access to energy, less access to funding, and this is linked to other rights. And in La Guajira, for example, the communities are just in the Guajira, they do not have access to water, to agro food services, education. Children are dying of malnutrition, and the economical benefits are for others. One of the biggest exporters of carbon to Israel is Glencore, and Glencore were extracting their carbon from Colombia, and the communities living in the area were no were affected and their rights were not considered, and they are not funding the just transition. They are funding a genocide in Israel. So we need to ensure that the local rights are respected and also the rights of the countries where they are exporting these benefits. Very interesting, Laura, about the connection, about the projects. I would like to pass the floor to Valentina so that you can tell us about your vision. I think that the idea for us as the technical secretariat is very important for us to ensure that we have more time for other people to give their suggestions. For us, it's really complicated to deal with people that continue thinking that the youth is that the youth are not able to make decisions, that we do not have enough experience. And I want to highlight an activity that where OLAGE invited me. It was an activity of youth for the nuclear energy, and it was so amazing to see the existing capacities because nuclear energy is not a very common topic. So I was there talking about the cooperation. I was representing OLADE, but I was so amazed because all of them were good professionals. They were students and they are really, really experts. And so I think there is a lot of capabilities. We are continue supporting the capacity development of those people who haven't had the opportunities. We are a technical secretariat, so we need to we need to work in coordination with our countries. For example, we have a gender agenda, and more people are joining our groups, and they say, yes, we want to know what other countries are doing, and gender and energy is led by Chile, but there are other countries that are led by other countries. For example, sustainable mobility is led by Uruguay, and these spaces that are like learning space of public policies. This help us to move forward and trying to link the countries, because maybe not all the countries know about the International Agency of Renewable Energies. But our challenge is sometimes to know what are the youth organizations. We were, of course, are doing some mapping. So when I Google, since I am in Chile, they show me and organizations from Chile. So that was something that we need to improve, because sometimes we share the information and we say, okay, we have people in Chile who are working this, and let's do something, because we as OLADE are promoting international cooperation and interinstitutional cooperation. That means between states. And I agree with all my panelists. I think that funding is a big challenge, because our mission right now is to say, yes, the youth are important because they are telling us what is missing. Because some other people are very comfortable because they say, oh, we are good. But we are the ones who are trying to translate this conversation between what the governments are doing versus the reality, what the young people are demanding and are demanding right now. But of course, we work with the states, we are supporting them to ensure that this works. So that is a challenge. So we are an organization that deals with some topics, and gender and youth is not, it's a cross-cutting topic. All the groups should have a gender component. For example, if there is a technical group on nuclear energy, they will be talking about the development of the countries, how they can include that in their energy agenda. But at the same time, we need to say more women in nuclear energy. So this is a cross-cutting topic. So those are our challenges for us. I think you realize we are at different levels of action. Mika works with the presidency of one country. Joyce is working from the academia but has local actions. Laura is working from another sector of the society, more civil society, and I am working on the states level. So this is what should happen. These are all the stakeholders who should come together, and this is a challenge to invite all of them. But I think the academia is open to dealing with youth people, because it is the academia who trains us and they know our interests and our strengths. So the challenge is to continue inviting all the stakeholders and trying to have a common objective, and to ensure that in the international agenda, we can influence on these agendas to ensure that we have enough funding to ensure participation and to address the urgent topics for the energy development in Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you very much. I would like to mention what Valentina mentioned about the role of women. And I also want to take advantage of your experience about the role that you have as leaders in your organizations. Please, 2 minutes. How are you promoting the active participation of women in your different institutions? And how this is impacting on the political process that you have at regional level? I think there is a perfect thread. I think it's a very powerful panel, not because we are women, but every everyone is impacting and implementing a wonderful work. So it's very important to have this here, to have all of us here today. And we start working with the communities when the communities call us, and the members of the observatory belong to different communities at the level of Peru, but also in Colombia. And we see sometimes you cannot separate. There are some root causes of the challenges, for example, extractivism. We are talking about gender and inclusion, but when we talk about gender in energy, I think we need first to have safe space because we want to have not only more women, but leading women, women that feel safe as part of their activism, because we in Latin America know that being an activist is a risk. You are dealing with exploitation of resources that could generate some risk. So first, we need to create the space, safe spaces. And second, we need to recognize that there are women, and many of them that can be part of this, because in this energy sector, I think it's a male and white space. But I think this has been changing in the past years. And we as OLAGE are learning also something important is learning to decentralize. So for example, as a leader, I can also involve other people. I'm not going to be a jam forever. So I think we need to move from the ego to the echo. So if we need to have collective intelligence. If we think that we are in a climate crisis, and if we are not learning as a civilization, this is not going to be worth it. So we need a collective intelligence, decentralization. And something I want to mention, something personal. We talk about the future, the perspectives, the agenda, different agendas, etc. And we talk about energy and climate crisis as that we have inherited from the previous generations. So positive and negative inheritances. But it's difficult for us to look at ourselves as ancestors. So my question is, how do you see yourselves as a very good ancestors for the next generations? Think about that. And then you are going to realize we are just a moment of the story. We are just a piece of the puzzle of the energy of the Latin American energy transition. And let's think that involving involving women is not a checklist, it's just a step that we need to take. Thank you. Thank you, Joyce, for your invitation, for the action and reflection. Now I'm passing the floor to Mika. Es muy difícil hablar después de este discurso. Sorry, it's very difficult to talk about the choice, the uh, discussion. And I think that I would like to talk about some aspects because I think my colleagues have already mentioned about the energy problems, because we are not talking about only energy transition, but a transition of social justice. And energy transition includes the society. We need a transition of rights. When we talk about this energy area that is dominated by men, but I think it is changing. So when we talk about social justice, we also need to talk about social justice in energy. For example, this table, we are here women, and we are talking about energy and territory. And within this pathway, what I think is that I think in my town that the people is talking about what is transformation, what is trying to do something without our challenges. So when we are committed to social justice and to work for a better world, it is means that we are trying to do possible the impossible. So that is something that we want to make because we want to tell the world that if it is possible to make these changes and it is possible to achieve our goals. I think that I agree with Joyce and Mikaela on some aspects, specifically about the just transition is more than energy transition, and the energy transition is just a component of transition. And when we talk about transition, we need to also talk about the transition of power. There is a book that is called Pedagogía del Oprimido from Paulo Freire, a Brazilian author. And when when I read that book, it talks about the oppressors. So oppressors have normally been men, old men, white men. There is this story of the oppressors being white and old men. And when we talk about power transition, as part of this book. I think that women are every time having more spaces in terms of power, not as much as men. This will take some generations, but mentioned this book because the book says that when we have the power, we shouldn't become oppressors. So I think that sometimes women um, are replicating these patriarchal attitudes and behaviors, and sometimes we are our own um, problems because this issue of transition in power is that is not only for women because we as women look for the well-being of all the people, so we need to be aware of the transition in of power. And this power should be not part of these dynamics of extractivism and colonialism. So for me, it's important to recognize the leadership roles. The climate change is full of women leading the sectors in civil society's company. Unfortunately, when we talk about decision makers, we still have men, for example, in a co-op, we still have 70% of white and of men, but we are trying to break these class limits and we are being part of the conversations. And when we talk about women, we are interested in this conversation about how this energy transition ensures not polluting energies, but not only clean, but safe energies. And we are not going to replicate the notions from the extractivism system. For example, in the extractive sector, when you have projects, women are just considered for care roles. So the women take care of the children, of the people working in the mines. So we assume a care role, and that are and then they become the prostitutes of the big owners of the companies. The women are abused along with the mine. So it's an extractive system, not only in the soil, but also in the bodies of the women. And when we talk about renewable energy projects, there are some other renewable projects that are replicating these dynamics. So how can we ensure that we are not replicating these power dynamics and that the projects that we are building will challenge that notion of power and extractivism of earth and of the bodies, female bodies. So for me, that are the challenges. So when we have female leaders in Latin America, we have a commitment to the social justice, socio-ecological transition, and the change in this concept of power, because the patriarchy tries to accumulate power for years. So we need to challenge this. We are going to be the first ones and say, okay, this is it. I need to give this leading space to another women, because I want to ensure that other women can bright here, because I have already brightened enough. So I think this is important when we talk about climate change and transition, because we are not only talking about the change of technology. Transition goes beyond that. It should be a more ethical and commitment transition in terms of feeling and thinking. Okay, the idea is the transfer of power with awareness, specifically on these women, full of very capable women. So Valentina, your comments now. It is difficult to continue after the words of my predecessors, because I think we all see the same. We see a sector with male presence, with if there are women, we have also white women. We do not have Afro-descendant or indigenous women. We don't have diversities represented, and this is something we need to continue um, promoting. I can give you examples of what we do internally, but you will see the Director of Integration and Access to Energy Security from OLADE is a woman, and is also from Central America. And it is nice because not all the sub-regions are represented internally. We do have some internal actions. I am supporting my boss, Gloria Alvarenga. The two of us lead the gender agenda, and we are trying to work with the countries to have better assessments, because without data we cannot we cannot make practical decisions. I want to share you something that we're doing last week, and we were traveling to Central America. We visited Honduras, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, and Ecuador to implement different capacity building workshops to ensure women connect with women, because this does not happen in all the countries. For us in Chile, it's easier to say, oh, we have associations of women, we have women's with leading roles, but we need more women, because they are capable, and because they are experts. But it is not the truth in all the countries. So we make these trips, and we uh, to connect women between them, and to create this sense of community. And we have this sense among ourselves, and this is really important. And Personally, I share what you have mentioned because I cannot express them, these ideas as well as they have expressed, but it is true. I think that my mission when I was talking with Leo and the creation of this panel, and in the panel where Joyce invited us as OLADE in Brazil, we say we are women in these panels. So there is a decision behind, but in addition to the capabilities, I think that nobody can have the adapt that the women here have the capacity to tell you the truth. And Joyce did it with her charming, and Mika with his security, and Laura with that honesty that she has. And I think we all can contribute to the conversation. So I just want to say thank you for sharing this space with them. Of course, I would like to invite more people here, but I just want to mention that this is the message we as an organization are. We work to the on the side of the people, on the side of the young people, on the side of women, on the side of the indigenous communities. And we are also trying to train ourselves. We get ready in order to find the best path for the people who needs. So thank you, Joyce, Mika, Laura, and Leo for your modeling. And thank you for listening to this conversation, because it's important that we highlight that there is uh, cooperation, interinstitutional cooperation among all the countries. Thank you. So Mika and Laura will just provide a very brief comment about the articulation between regional organizations. First, I would like to thank you. So I think maybe it was difficult for you to understand what I talk. Thank you very much for inviting me. Just I learned a lot today with you, and now I learn about the work that you are doing in your countries. And I'm going to tell you to give you and to mention an idea that I think we all need to repeat. This is a phrase or a statement that is part of my own work. So when we talk about the energy, it is not only about energy. I think that we need to reflect about all the different areas. For example, some people say, I'm not interested in changing the world, but I want to influence people in terms of the actions and decisions. So we're not going to change the world, but we do want to influence on the people who are making the changes. Because what you as young people can do is to mobilize and to achieve big changes, and we want to highlight important actions. And we have women who are working on these areas, and it's a role model. And we can gather together and to see what is happening in this sector. It is not easy, but as Laura mentioned, this is the sector that also relates to our bodies, but we need to do something in this space. And we have more women and more young people within this space for the people who would like to change this energy model, um, and also to work with the communities within the territories. So we have the possibility of doing things locally, but at the same time changing the world. So if we act together, thank you very much for your presence. I'm so happy to start connecting with young people in the area of energy because I think sometimes we live like in a bubble and we cannot find young people working in the same area, but that this space as this conference is really important. And also within the territories, we find other people and we can define how all the parts of the society can work together. Well, I don't know what to say, but so I think that we as civil society have many tools to advocate for decisions. I think that we need to demand the governments from policies that guarantee a fair transition, but we also would give them tools to the governments. There are some countries that are very ambitious in terms of climate policies. Chile is one of them, and Colombia also, and Mexico. So these are countries that are willing to implement big changes. But the system where we live, in terms of cooperation, global cooperation, sometimes do not allow the states to make the decisions they need to make in order to live well. So Chile is not one of the affected countries, but Uruguay, Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay, that are part of the Mercosur, will be impacted by the European Union agreement, uh, specifically for the demands from investors from against United States, America, Latin, and the Caribbean. So the governments from this area are condemned to pay private companies more than 333,000 million of dollars. And this, of course, represents one third of the amount of the climate catastrophes that has been happening since 2021. And this is superior all the investment that these countries receive in 2022. So when we see the amount of money that these companies need to pay the private companies, this of course n- does not relates to the amount that they receive. And sometimes the companies should demand the companies to pay taxes. And also we need to rethink on the debt system. What is the capacity of our countries? They are they have enormous debts and they are paying more in interest than would they invest in health or education. So we as civil society should study more about this. Maybe we could help our states to think on innovation because sometimes the civil society provides more innovation. And also we like to thank Joyce, Valentina, I admire Joyce from many years. I'm so happy that she's here with us, even though in Zoom. So I think that these spaces should convince us that there are more people working in this sector and that we all want a real transformation and that in reality we look for a transformation that help us to heal our bodies because in Latin America and the Caribbean, where we have had historical sacrifices, we need to heal with our ancestors and to forgive because we need to make transitions in order to give us our region a vision that dignifies life. But when we are here, we are not talking about big investments so that we win a lot of money. That's not the idea. The idea is to ensure that life that is important not only for human beings but other species that we share the life with. Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Thank you for all the for you. We are just ending with a call invitation to an energy transition and social transition that is based on the youth and in the territories. And as you mentioned, this will help us to improve the capacity and advocacy of young people. Thank you all the panelists and thank you for this participation. Now we will close this with a magistry conference from the Paraíba University. Thank you very much. So we invite you to the Aula Magna. Please do not join your coffee break yet. Just go directly to the Aula Magna and then you will be able to enjoy the coffee break. Thank you.